Good evening once again. This talk slash lecture slash conversations we've been having surrounding the book, The Psychology of Gratitude. We've been doing this for many months now. We do highly recommend you purchasing this book on your own and reading it and studying it. It is not a book just to be read. Really is a book to be studied again and again and again and again. And again, it's never a book to be given away. It's a book for you to keep. And a lot of times we might go through many books and figure, I already read that book so many times, I'm just going to give it to someone else, which can be a blessing for someone else. But we recommend if you are that kind of person, purchase two. So you have one for yourself, and later, if you feel the need, you can always give it away. We've learned to adopt that custom. So we're going to be going through some ideas about gratitude, and one specific idea that's not in the title, but don't worry, the title is still relevant to what we're talking about, because gratitude always should serve as a motivation and meaning for our existence. There's a plethora of research already that's out there. We presented it before about how good it is to get into a mindset of gratitude. Now, before you should be one or both of these particular handouts. One is, these are both from the web. These are not a production of the SSB. We do not own the copyrights to this particular thing. You can Google and look for it. You can Google Gratitude Journal and you'll be able to pull up something similar to this. In taking a class recently on, I believe it's pronounced as andragogy, and which is different from pedagogy, which is the education of children, and the other is the education of adults. One of the things they say, adults learn by actually doing, participating, and there are a lot of people who don't like to participate in class. They don't like to raise their hand. They don't like to open up a discussion because it's scary, it's frightening. People might think that you're crazy or might think that you're, stupid or silly or dumb or what have you. But it is the best way to learn, for us to be interactive. So you have these before you. I have extra copies. If you want to just take it home, you could do it here. I will reserve some time now to do that if you want to. But I did want to open up a discussion just to kind of get the ball rolling on this idea of gratitude. It's something that we like to do because it kind of gets our mind flowing. It's good to get those neural pathways back into thinking about what I'm grateful for. And it seems like this is sort of a popular thing that a lot of gurus are doing. You see a lot of people on the internet doing Facebook Live about such topics. But sometimes when things like that happen, it seems to take away from its importance. Sometimes it becomes something of commerce to make money. People are just doing it, perhaps. But it still doesn't take away its importance of us finding time to do this every single day. Because as individuals, you and I, what are we anyway? Who are we? We've already discussed that so many times. We are immortal beings living many lifetimes again and again and again. And oftentimes there's this discussion, and now with the advent of epigenetics coming around the past 10, maybe 20 years, we know that we are not solely formed by our genetics. The genetics is not the driving force for everything that we are. We know that it is way beyond that. Since we are immortal beings, we bring with us all that we learn, all the experiences undergone in our past. Joanna DeAngelis, in the book Psychology of Gratitude, she says the spirit imparts to the genetic code the need of the intellecto-moral development. And in one of the books of Andrea Louise, you can find cases of this in Al Solar, Believe in Action and Reaction as well, and several other books. They talk about people that are reincarnating, and I believe in the book Missionaries of the Light as well, spirits that are allowed to partake in their reincarnatory plan. In actuality, their physical presentation. There are spirits that are like what maybe you might call body architects that actually are specialized in formulating how your body is going to look. Not wanting to go into too much detail, because that's not the purpose of our talk today, but I do recommend, if you get a chance, read Noel Solar. Well, read the whole entire collection of Andrea Louise. It's phenomenal. Noel Solar, Missionaries of the Light, I believe Action and Reaction. They taught, and probably a lot of them have a lot of it, but also, which we are sold out of, Between Heaven and Earth. So, welcome. So there's a story in Missionaries of the Light, No Solar, about people that are partaking in the choosing of how their physical body is going to look like. And because they had the spirits, the higher spirits had planned out how it was going to look and whatnot, how things were supposed to go. But what wound up happening is that the sheer force and power of the spirit kind of modified a little bit what had originally been planned, because the spirit's impregnation of its thought process, its guilt, it's what Jung would call its shadow, which is an archetype of all that lies beneath our unconscious mind, was imprinting in the physical body of this person, of this incarnating spirit. And so you can read more about it. So it's very interesting when we talk about genetics. But how do we affect more positive change within us? I mean, we know that there is, physical things that we go through and experiences we have throughout each incarnation. But ultimately, our purpose is to become better, right? That's our purpose. That's our goal. It sounds so generic. It sounds like something you read on a bumper sticker. But how do we affect more change? And I'm going to open up for people just to say what they think. How do we affect more positive change within us and around us, consequently? How do we make things better for ourselves?
Being kinder to ourselves. It seems that a lot of us are hard on ourselves when we see a mistake we've made or something like an omission. We should have done something and we didn't do the action. So the hard part is being negative on yourself. So when I say kindness, it's acceptance.
Yeah, the kindness to yourself and to others, and being more positive, having that willingness to make better than you did yesterday. But it's very hard sometimes, but you try, at least you make an effort.
Leo was saying laugh at our mistakes, but correct it afterwards. There needs to be that aspect of reparation, yes. Anyone else want to interject? How do we become better? How do we work on ourselves? Like what? Anybody? Any thoughts? So what are you all doing then, every day in, day out? What are you all doing? Well, let's see what Joanna tells us. She says wholesome habits. This is a first line of action, if you will, how to affect change within us and around us. Creating wholesome habits. I believe it was Kardec that said something to the effect of education is the modification of habits, better habits. Hopefully you're not picking up more negative habits, but it's positive habits that we're creating, new ones. How many people like change? You like change? Yeah? Oh, okay. Everybody else? No? That's less than 25% of the room likes change. Change. Most of the time for us to evolve, it's getting out of our comfort zone and facing things that are scary or unknown to us. I'll share a story that is not my own, but there's a Brazilian therapist, spiritist therapist in Brazil, whose name I'm complete, Claudio. Let's say Claudio. All right. He does a series in the Spiritist magazine. You can look it up. And him and his wife are both psychologists and spiritists in Brazil. And they do a whole series on the psychology of Joanna de Angelis. You can look on YouTube. They're phenomenal. But he tells this story, and I'm going to impart it to you. He says that he had this patient who he would frequently see. And he said one week she didn't come to the consultation. So he, his office called her. He called her and said, hey, let's call her Mary. Hey, Mary, hey, you didn't show up for your consultation this week. What happened? She said, oh, my dog is really sick. I have to give him antibiotics. I have to be with him day and night. And I'm so tired by the time it comes during the day. I'll reschedule. So he said, oh, no problem. 2 weeks passed, and she called, scheduled. She came in. He said she came into my consultation room. We're talking. She starts crying, saying that she has the meaning for her life is gone, and she has no purpose, no goals, and anything she does, it's misinterpreted. So she begins complaining about her life. He said, so I'm listening to her, and I get this inspiration. I turn to her, and I say, Mary, look at all the good you did with your dog. I mean, how wonderful it is to have an animal, to care for it, to love, and how much dedication you have to your animal. Is that not a purpose, something positive that you're adding to humanity? Instead of thinking about all these negative things in your life, why don't you try to focus on all the good that you can do and potentially can do more moving forward? So he said after that consultation, she never again came to his office. And he said, I don't know why, but maybe she didn't like the idea of change, the idea of stepping out of what she was comfortable with. And believe it or not, some of us are kind of comfortable complaining, or we're comfortable in our situation because it's scary to come out of our comfort zone. It really is something scary because we get confident, we get used to what we're doing, we feel good about it. But imagine having to change, to do something different. It can be a very scary thing. What does wholesome habits look like to you all? What is a wholesome habit? What is a good habit? Wholesome meaning good, noble. Joan is saying healthy. Yeah. Eating healthy is a good habit, sure. Becoming more disciplined. Oh, hold on, let me give you the mic.
Exercising.
Exercising is good. Even the teenagers are participating, guys. Smiling, it's a good habit to have.
Like being nice to strangers in the street.
Being nice to strangers is a good, wholesome habit. What else? Does anyone have new habits they're trying to start this year that's positive? It's going to affect you personally, and ultimately, when we do good things for ourselves, it's going to affect positively people around us. Smile more. Yasko says to be more tolerant. What does that look like, to be more tolerant? Hold on.
Yeah, I think first to be tolerant, to begin with, you have to be not judgmental. Otherwise, you won't be tolerant. You will just judge and be impatient or something. And second is really be watchful to our thought first, and then with our mouth, what comes out from our mouth. But only the thought also is bad, I think. To be impatient with people, be judgmental, be intolerant, to want to be my way or no way.
My way or the highway is not good.
Just put yourself in the other person's shoes, the other person's position as well. That helps you really stop yourself from saying things that perhaps later on you'll regret, because then you're giving a second thought to it and respecting the, again, how evolved or not that person may be. Then, maybe the person need help, and then you can help instead of just slashing out or saying something that, again, you will regret later on.
And these are really good ideas. Recently, Daniel had shared something, I think, on Facebook that the Brazilian channel Global had passed on their network. And it was the case of this somewhat of a drug dealer, juvenile delinquent in his story. And when he became an adult, he said that he was on his way to do some horrible act, murder or something to that effect. And he passed by this area where this gentleman was with other people. And he was so intent on going on killing this person. He'd rage in him and anger and all the negative things running through his mind. He said, I had my gun on my hip, and I was ready to do what I needed to do. He said, I passed by this guy, and this guy, we crossed paths, and he said to me, hey, and I'm paraphrasing what he's saying here. You got to look it up online. But he said something to the effect of, can you imagine, because the guy who had the gun had some friends with him. This random guy said to him, if you imagine, if you take all of your energy and all the goodness that's within you to do something good with you and your little friends, imagine all the good that you can do in your life. And the guy with the delinquent, the juvenile delinquent, said that in that moment, the way that this gentleman, the kindness and the love that he showed him in that split second, changed his life. He decided not to go and murder this person. He said, from then on out, my mindset changed on life. What was fascinating was that this gentleman, who actually was a soccer teacher for the local neighborhood and would teach a lot of the young kids so that they don't get involved in drugs and gangs, sort of a community outreach he did. And he lived his life doing that. He had no idea the impact he had on this young juvenile and how he had modified his life. So, of course, in the dramatic fashion, Global went and filmed when the guy told him for the first time after 20-some years how much of an impact his kindness had on him, and it changed his life. And it was interesting because the guy's like, I didn't know that I had that impact. I just was doing what I thought was right. So it's interesting, we talk about wholesome habits, about not judging. I think someone mentioned that, but not judging other people and sharing kindness and all those good things. Joanna says the acquisition of wholesome habits, those considered edifying and which produce emotional harmony in the social group, contribute positively to the transformation of the aggressive tendencies and feelings of low self-esteem and enhance the efforts towards any challenge. It's accomplished through educational processes, especially those of a moral nature. Wow. The acquisition of wholesome habits, the ways in which we acquire these wholesome habits. And she refers to the ones that are edifying, because there are a lot of habits that we can have, but she talks of the ones that are edifying, the ones that make us better, create emotional harmony within us. Recently, there was a YouTube blogger who suffers from a lot of mental illness, anxiety, depression, and what have you, and she gets millions of views on her videos, and she was explaining how she's been in therapy and whatnot, and she said that her therapist actually recommended something she'd never done before in her entire life and has made a dramatic difference, and she was shocked. She's been on a lot of different types of medications, therapy, but a lot of it, she said, for the better part of her life didn't help her. But her therapist got her involved and actually posted it to my Facebook today. It's this type of volunteer work where people can go into the NICU, which is the neonatal intensive care units, and spend time holding babies that are opioid addicted because of their mothers were doing drugs during their pregnancy. So there is a need for people to volunteer. And she said that the moment that I began to hold this little infant that was so fragile and vulnerable and just give this love to him, she said a switch went off in my mind, something changed. And she said, I never had experienced that. It produced this emotional harmony, creating this new habit. So we can see if you think about all the new habits that you formed over your lifetime, how good it made you feel, whether it was, being nicer to neighbors, working out more, anything that's positive, whether it's going to your church, going to your Spiritist Center, going to your synagogue, whatever it is. Observe how it makes you feel. We mentioned this little side note, that if genetic fatalism existed, we would have no need for progress. Scientific and philosophical doctrines would have no reason to exist because our psyche would be incapable of assimilating them because it would be dependent upon genes or genetic factors. This just proves to us that we are much more than just our genes, our physical composition, our physical makeup. Because if that were the case, then we would have to do nothing. We would be robots, if you will. And this just proves that we are so much more than just our genes, and this is probably what catapulted epigenetics to be what it is today. And did you know that you are hallucinogenic and theotaxic beings? Did y'all know that? What? What is that? Anybody know what that is? I didn't know what it is, and well, until I read the book. Theotaxic, I kind of heard a little bit about. If I'm even saying it right, hallucinogenic, which means originate from the light, and theotaxic, meaning movement in the direction towards God. So we are derivatives of the light being God, and we are reaching towards Him. What does that mean? It means when we talk about the law of progress, we are constant motion to go up, albeit slow, sluggish, dragging our feet, or someone has to pull us along, but we are going. We can't go back. We might be stationary for quite a while, but like the gospel according to Spiritism teaches us, we have this incessant drive to be better, whether we recognize it or not. That's why a lot of mental illness exists, at least in part, perhaps the angst we feel, because somewhere deep inside of us, we want to be better. And Joanna says in this beautiful book, and also in the book Existential Conflicts, she talks about our old self versus the self that we want to be and the conflict that causes. And that's where a lot of our angst comes from. Joanna says there is moral order in force throughout the cosmos, which manifests itself in everything as the law of progress and is responsible for the universal balance, commanding the ethical and spiritual developments from whose action of convergence nothing escapes unscathed. I remember having a conversation with people a lot lately in regards to our current political climate. And the one thing that Spiritism brings to us is comfort in knowing that nothing is by chance. Everything happens for a reason. It's for our own self-betterment, reflection, endurance, and to grow. And a lot of other things too we don't have time to discuss. But this is true. There is universal balance. We might not see it right now because it's very difficult for some or all of us. But there is a behind-the-scenes driving force overseeing everything. Who has ever watched that cartoon when you were a kid, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? It's my favorite as a child. No one has seen it in this room? 2 people? Really? No, you guys serious? You've never seen it? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, all right. Okay, Venetia saw it. It's a phenomenal series. It's originally published by C.S. Lewis. He's most, I think, known for that, but C.S. Lewis actually had a lot of great ideas. And believe it or not, but Joanna DeAngelis talks about him in this chapter 9. She mentions C.S. Lewis, which I found very interesting because she mentions him, she references him, because he talks about something very interesting. He talks about what I just mentioned, that there is an order over everything. But he says it in such a way that it's not as scary as, well, you guys are going to have to see the behind the scenes of this real quick. It's not as scary as perhaps other people might make it out to be. He doesn't heavily go into brimstone and fire kind of Christianity. So I wanted to play this for you guys to understand his explanation of the moral order of things. So as soon as I get the green light in the back, I will play this for you. So in essence, what wound up happening is that C.S. Lewis became very famous, of course, for a lot of his publications. But in the might have been 50s or 60s, BBC got wind of some of the books and lectures he had gave and invited him to do a short series with them. And it wound up like blowing up, and people actually really loved him because the way he explains things is so amazing, makes it so understandable. Now, someone on the internet did this drawing, and they just did a double time speed. So you'll see in drawing, I can't even explain it. In drawing through animation, and being narrated by this British gentleman, the explanation. So Daniel, can I play it? Okay. Lights, can someone grab the lights? Thank you.
the reality of the moral law. I now go back to what I said at the end of the first talk, that there were two odd things about the human race. First, that they were haunted by the idea of a sort of behaviour they ought to practice, what you might call fair play, or decency, or morality, or the law of nature. Second, that they did not, in fact, do so. Now, some of you may wonder why I call this odd. It may seem to you the most natural thing in the world. In particular, you may have thought I was rather hard on the human race. After all, you may say, what I call breaking the law of right and wrong, or of nature, only means that people are not perfect. And why on earth should I expect them to be? That would be a good answer if what I was trying to do was to fix the exact amount of blame which is due to us for not behaving as we expect others to behave. But that is not my job at all. I'm not concerned at present with blame. I'm trying to find out truth. And from that point of view, the very idea of something being imperfect, of its not being what it ought to be, has certain consequences. If you take a thing like a stone or a tree, it is what it is, and there seems no sense in saying it ought to have been otherwise. Of course, you may say a stone is the wrong shape if you want to use it for a rockery, or that a tree is a bad tree because it does not give you as much shade as you expected. But all you mean is that the stone or tree does not happen to be convenient for some purpose of your own. You are not, except as a joke, blaming them for that. You really know that given the weather and the soil, the tree could not have been any different. What we, from our point of view, call a bad tree is obeying the laws of its nature just as much as a good one. Now, have you noticed what follows? It follows that what we usually call the laws of nature, the way weather works on a tree, for example, may not really be laws in the strict sense, but only in a manner of speaking. When you say that falling stones always obey the law of gravitation, is not this much the same as saying that the law only means what stones always do? You do not really think that when a stone is let go, it suddenly remembers that it is under orders to fall to the ground. You only mean that, in fact, it does fall. In other words, you cannot be sure that there is anything over and above the facts themselves, any law about what ought to happen, as distinct from what does happen. The laws of nature, as applied to stones or trees, may only mean what nature, in fact, does. But if you turn to the law of human nature, the law of decent behaviour, it is a different matter. That law certainly does not mean what human beings, in fact, do. For, as I said before, many of them do not obey this law at all, and none of them obey it completely. The law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them, but the law of human nature tells you what human beings ought to do and do not. In other words, when you are dealing with humans, something else comes in above and beyond the actual facts. You have the facts, how men do behave, and you also have something else, how they ought to behave. In the rest of the universe, there need not be anything but the facts. Electrons and molecules behave in a certain way, and certain results follow, and that may be the whole story. As a footnote, I do not think it is the whole story, as you will see later. I mean that as far as the argument has gone up to date, it may be. But men behave in a certain way, and that is not the whole story, for all the time you know that they ought to behave differently. Now this is really so peculiar that one is tempted to try to explain it away. For instance, we might try to make out that when you say a man ought not to act as he does, you only mean the same as when you say that a stone is the wrong shape, namely that what he is doing happens to be inconvenient to you. But that is simply untrue. A man occupying the corner seat in the train because he got there first, and a man who slipped into it while my back was turned and removed my bag, are both equally inconvenient, but I blame the second man, and do not blame the first. I am not angry, except perhaps for a moment before I come to my senses, with a man who trips me up by accident. I am angry with a man who tries to trip me up, even if he does not succeed. Yet the first has hurt me, and the second has not. Sometimes the behavior which I call bad is not inconvenient to me at all, but the very opposite. In war, each side may find a traitor on the other side very useful, but though they use him and pay him, they regard him as human vermin. So you cannot say that what we call decent behavior in others is simply the behavior that happens to be useful to us. And as for decent behavior in ourselves, I suppose it is pretty obvious that it does not mean the behavior that pays. It means things like being content with 30 shillings when you might have got £3, doing schoolwork honestly when it would be easy to cheat, leaving a girl alone when you would like to make love to her, staying in dangerous places when you could go somewhere safer, keeping promises you would rather not keep, and telling the truth, even when it makes you look a fool. Some people say that though decent conduct does not mean what pays each particular person at a particular moment, still it means what pays the human race as a whole, and that consequently there is no mystery about it. Human beings, after all, have some sense. They see that you cannot have any real safety or happiness except in a society where everyone plays fair, and it is because they see this that they try to behave decently. Now, of course, it is perfectly true that safety and happiness can only come from individuals, classes, and nations being honest and fair and kind to each other. It is one of the most important truths in the world. But as an explanation of why we feel as we do about right and wrong, it just misses the point. If we ask, "Why ought I to be unselfish?" and you reply, "Because it is good for society," we may then ask, "Why should I care what's good for society except when it happens to pay me personally?" And then you will have to say, "Because you ought to be unselfish," which simply brings us back to where we started. You are saying what is true, but you are not getting any further. If a man asked what was the point of playing football, it would not be much good saying, "in order to score goals," for trying to score goals is the game itself, not the reason for the game. And you would really only be saying that football was football, which is true, but not worth saying. In the same way, if a man asks, "What is the point of behaving decently?" it is no good replying, "in order to benefit society." For trying to benefit society, in other words, being unselfish, for society after all only means other people, is one of the things decent behavior consists in. All you are really saying is that decent behavior is decent behavior. You would have said just as much if you had stopped at the statement, "Men ought to be unselfish." And that is where I do stop. Men ought to be unselfish, ought to be fair. Not that men are unselfish, nor that they like being unselfish, but that they ought to be. The moral law, or law of human nature, is not simply a fact about human behavior in the same way as the law of gravitation is, or may be, simply a fact about how heavy objects behave. On the other hand, it is not a mere fancy, for we cannot get rid of the idea, and most of the things we say and think about men would be reduced to nonsense if we did. And it is not simply a statement about how we should like men to behave for our own convenience, for the behavior we call bad or unfair is not exactly the same as the behavior we find inconvenient, and may even be the opposite. Consequently, this rule of right and wrong, or law of human nature, or whatever you call it, must, somehow or other, be a real thing. A thing that is really there, not made up by ourselves. And yet it is not a fact in the ordinary sense, in the same way as our actual behavior is a fact. It begins to look as if we shall have to admit that there is more than one kind of reality, that in this particular case there is something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real. A real law, which none of us made, but which we find pressing on us.
And saying is the idea of right or wrong is actually there's a driving force behind it. The sensation of right and wrong, why we do what we do, is not merely, as he was explaining about the rock dropping, there's something greater, a moral order behind all things. And Joanna actually talks about this in the book. She says, the precept of right and wrong is universal, despite the different manifestations observed between primitive and civilized peoples, which is simply a natural effect of the law of progress. So knowing right or wrong, good and bad, that sensation is within us all, independent of where we come from, where we live, cultural differences. We know that reading in the Spiritist literature, in the 5 books of the codification, we know the Spirits tell us that the law of God, as it's stated in the Spirit's book, is written in our conscience. It's there. If you really want to delve deep into the laws that exist, not necessarily the physical laws, but the moral laws, the divine or natural laws, are in part 3 of the Spirit's book. It's pretty amazing. If you take some time out just to read and study that aspect, the entire Spirit's book is phenomenal. But it really, I found that it will blow your mind if you take the time to read that. Let me read you this quote. All proposals of human life institute the ethics of correct behavior due to another law still, that of cause and effect, which demonstrates harmony to be everywhere and concedes not only free will to all individuals, but also the responsibility for their thoughts, speech, and actions, for all are sowers and reapers of their own harvests. All human creatures are free to express the mental, emotional, and moral conducts they enjoy in the same way they face their consequences. Therefore, it becomes indispensable to keep the moral law, for it leads the individual to healthy psychological conducts. This, if you break this down, when people talk about how Spiritism doesn't tell you what to do and not to do, but it shows you what could potentially happen through certain actions. And then it's up to us whether we want to take responsibility or not, because we could do them still, and then we could see what happens. And something good happens, and it's good. You know, a good tree only bears good fruits. So if we do something that's probably not the best for us, we're going to feel it. If you eat that red hot chili pepper, unless you're the kind of person that really likes that kind of stuff and you like that burn, but for the rest of us, your stomach acid might really not like you, and your stomach and your throat won't like you. So a poor analogy of it, but it is. Let me do something real quick here, guys. In coming here, sometimes these things happen. They just switch on us. So, the acquisition of human dignity. I wanted to talk about this idea of dignity. This idea of what dignity means. Who knows what dignity means, or what definitions would you all give it? There's not necessarily a terrible wrong answer, but when you think of the word human dignity or dignity in general, like I have dignity, what do you guys think of? What flashes through your mind? Yeah, let's go.
I think it is to preserve our wellness, our own wellness, and also of the others. Everything should be to protect, to preserve this. So that means physical, moral integrity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought of the words inherent respect, that all beings have inherent respect, and when we believe that and feel that way, it affects how we speak to everyone, from a child to an elder.
That's pretty good. Thank you, guys. Anyone else have any ideas? What's that? They said it all. the acquisition of human dignity. The self needs to undergo a process similar to that of a diamond, process of cutting and polishing. The highest victory for human beings in Christ is the acquisition of the faculty of love and surrender to ennobling ideas. Just a quick side note, what the self is. The self is defined as the totality of the psyche, including all the elements such as the ego. Because the self is all of the psyche, its viewpoint contains objectivity, acceptance, reconciliation, balance of opposites of the ego and shadow, persona and shadow, and many other contradictory feelings and impulses. If you go back to our previous talks, I do believe they should be online, and we covered all of those archetypes of the ego, the shadow. If you Google Carl Gustav Jung, you can learn more about his topic of the archetypes and how that plays into us. But the self is an inclusion of all those things. And the self is something that, as Joanna shares with us, needs to undergo a process similar to that of a diamond, of learning, of growing. And self, again, encompasses everything. All of the things that we've learned from our previous lives, all of our challenges, and us overcoming them. But when she talks about the acquisition of human dignity, we all named a few things, what they mean. She talks about the highest victory of human beings in Christ is the acquisition of faculty of love and surrender to ennobling ideas. Whenever we mention Christ here, because we feel like, I feel like, let me not put this on the society itself, but my personal view, which I don't normally like to always share, but sometimes I feel like Christ is misinterpreted the way he's been put out there in either the mass media or through different religious arenas. They might view him in a specific way. But through our knowledge of Spiritism, we view Christ as a model and guide for us. We think of him as this great guide for the way that he lived his life, his unconditional love, his acceptance of all people, whether they were men or women or what have you. His whole message was sharing love, promoting love, acceptance, doing away with fear. He was the ultimate demonstration, the significance of surmounting one's own limits and an unremitting continuum of efforts towards peace. We were discussing this very fact this past Thursday about the necessity of having to Christ come and live the life that he led. I believe it was Yaska who was talking about literature she was reading about the necessity and why Christ came and had to fulfill being a martyr on the cross and being an example for us that no matter what's thrown at us, we could still remain firm and steadfast in our purpose. Dignity, Joanna shares, is the value acquired through personal effort. As C.S. Lewis was sharing, the little animation of when he was talking about how easy it might be sometimes to cheat on a test or to make things look a certain way at your job to make yourself look better. But you will feel so much better about yourself. You will have more dignity if you tell the truth and live a life of honesty, acquiring these acquisitions of love, surrendering to higher ideals of life. But what often holds us back from acquiring wholesome habits, better ennobling ideas and ideals? What do you think now that the new year has almost come and gone, and everyone likes to set New Year's resolutions, what can hold us back from creating new habits, achieving our goals?
I think it's the old habit. It's easier to maintain the whole old habit, in a daily life, and we caught up in this web, this net of, routine that is not only us that make it, but it's almost imposed to us, or we let that be in our lives, like work schedule, work stress, and we keep in that mode. So we have to actually put an effort, first an awareness that we are in this bad habit or environment or web, and then put an effort to get out from this. It's like you are in a certain speed. You have to make some action, put some actions in order to change direction, to slow down. think about if we are going a wrong route.
What's that, Rita?
You blame on tomorrow.
You use the excuse that I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it later.
I thought about your opening comments. It could be fear of change, and the qualities that we need to summon up in order to get to someplace new is a lot of drive and diligence.
So I want everyone to think of one thing that they had promised themselves this year that they're going to do better. Hold that thought in your head. Think about it. I'll give you a minute. Think about something you want to change for the better about yourself this year. Teenagers as well. Think about one thing you want to do better this year, and you told yourself, you told your bestie, and you're like, I'm going to work on this, I swear. You guys got it in your mind? What is stopping you from achieving that? Juliana, did you raise your hand? Did you? What's stopping you from achieving that goal? What's stopping you?
Nothing's really stopping me. It's just, I don't know, just being more grateful.
Okay. Okay. Oh, hold on.
I think only ourselves.
That was deep. Ourselves. That's so true. We are oftentimes our greatest impediment to achieve things. Joseph or Johnny? I always forget. I'm sorry. Joseph.
The laziness not to exercise that much.
Laziness not to exercise too much, or not enough. Yeah, that's so true. Anybody else? We can hold ourselves back by our own thoughts, laziness, or just not fear of change, fear of what might come. Joanna shares with us that one of the things that holds us back a lot, that impedes our evolution, is ingratitude. She says it is accountable for the moral indifference for everything that one receives from life, as well as from the missionaries of the past who contributed to the invaluable treasures that are used today in the form of longevity, comfort, health, science and technology, leisure, and pleasant interactions. I'll give you a couple examples of this. I'm in a couple of group chats with my friends on my phone. And one of the group chats are some people that I used to work with. And they were all complaining. Some of my friends work in D.C., and my one friend, if you're watching, I'm so sorry. I'm going to put you on blast. I won't say her name, though. She was complaining about how there was women were marching for a particular reason. I won't go into why. It's not the point of it's not the point of this talk. But she's complaining. A couple of them are complaining, like, oh my goodness, I have to, it's causing a commotion and this and that and all these things. And why are people protesting? It's so ridiculous. Protesting does nothing. So hearing, of course, everyone reacting in the chat. And I said, wait a minute. Hold on. I went quickly to Googled from the history.com, I think it is, a really good article about the suffrage movement that happened over 100 years ago and all the work that they did to allow women today to vote. And I said, hey, wait a second. What about those women that, they burned bras and stuff and did some other weird things, but they really affected change. So don't put down people that are trying to push progress forward by protesting for the betterment of humanity. Well, are there people protesting just because they want to get out of work? Probably, of course. There's always that those few people that do that, of course, but the large majority wish to affect change. And we should be grateful for people that are taking their time to want to better society, to want for rights to be equal. And then she called me, you're just such a mom. And then my comment was dismissed. That's okay. But Joanna says we should be grateful for people from the past who've paved a way for us to be here and now. But she does warn again that ingrates, people that are ungrateful, become a pathological state for their clan, their social group, and in all groups in which they are asserted. It becomes like a virus. When you have a person in a social setting or work setting or family setting, when they begin to talk about all the complain or they act ungrateful, it seems to affect everybody else, even sometimes unconsciously, and everyone else begins to complain about the same thing. So then it becomes truly a pathological problem. And the people who are around them begin to follow the same thing if we're not careful. But for many of us, gratitude might come very unnaturally because perhaps we think about all the negative things in our lives. I want to share with you another story, again, from the same psychologist who was counseling a gentleman, and he came into the office, Claudio's office, and the gentleman said, I got remarried, and my second wife, you wouldn't believe it. I divorced the first one, and it looks like I married her twin, and I can't believe it. I have the same problems with this one. It's like, do they know each other secretly, and I don't know it? And he was complaining about all this, the reasons why, and it was the same problems he had with his first wife. And then Claudia turned to him and said, did you stop to think that maybe it's not the second wife and it's you? Did you stop to open your eyes a little bit that the problems that you carry with you into this current marriage already existed? That the things that you're ungrateful for about your life and the good that she does is the same thing you complained about with someone else? It's a matter of perspective. Our perceptions are our realities. How we view things is how we experience them. So for people like this gentleman, to be grateful for things was very unnatural for him because he had been accustomed to, there was a thing. It was his thing among his friends to be the complainer. But Joanna says gratitude actually must be rehearsed to be experienced. So maybe a good rehearsal would be in your family, just appreciating them. I think Dr. Gary Smiley was his name, but I think back in the 80s. Is it? No? Okay. I think it's Dr. Smiley. I remember as a child my mother watching this on the TV, and back when people actually recorded things with VHS tapes. And one of the things he was discussing about was learning how to be grateful in your own family. So he said one of the techniques for him to learn how to be more grateful is that every time his daughter would come into the room, he'd say, wow, you walked into the room and you smiled and it made my day. Oh, I'm so grateful for you. It was amazing. And then his son would walk in the room like, hey, Dad, morning. Wow, awesome. You said good morning to me. That's wow. So he said he started to do this so much that his kids were like, oh my God, Dad, that's so annoying. But he said I started to do it with my wife and the little things she would do for me. And she'd make the bed or she'd make my lunch. I would go, wow, bologna. That's amazing. But he said he started to do it, so many times, and he really developed this sensation of being grateful for everything. The mailman would drop off the mail. Wow, you delivered my mail. That's awesome. You begin to find all the little reasons why, like, oh gosh, sometimes I think to myself, how amazing it is someone comes and delivers my mail to my door for me. Someone comes and gets my trash for me. My condo association makes sure that no one's doing anything crazy. I get emails all the time and complaints about somebody left their trash can too long after the trash bin. I mean, it's insane. Your cat was on the sidewalk 15 minutes longer than what it should have been. It's amazing. But our structure is set up. We have so much to be grateful for. So much. So it's a matter of focus. So much so that a lot of people don't know the story of Hitler, Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler actually was an artist. He could draw really well, but he was denied access to the art school, art college. Now, I'm not giving an excuse for what he did, the mass murder and destruction of a whole society. Not doing that. He had deeply, profoundly corrupt ideas and ideals, and that's a story for another day. But some psychologists, this particular psychologist, Claudio, was talking about this idea that his profound talent, had he been focusing his mind on something else, more positive, what he could have done for society could have been very positive. So it's a matter of direction. His direction was directed towards something evil. Now, why he chose that and the reasons behind it is not for us to judge. That's for God to judge and determine what's going to happen to his soul or wherever his soul is now. But imagine if we just redirect our energy towards something more positive, towards gratitude, towards being joyous. Imagine how our life may be. The Greek philosopher Epicurus says that happy people remember the past with gratitude, are content with the present, and await the future without fear. So we are grateful for what has already happened. We're happy for where we currently are, and we're not fearful of what is to come. Joanna says to persevere in the correct conduct, even under offense or lack of consideration, becomes a challenge of moral health and social behavior, so that it may be modified to work on behalf of a new mentality, which shall be instituted among all individuals in the future. So we will, in the future, as opposed to now, when people do good to us, we get upset when if we're doing good to someone. Let me tell you an actual story. Joanna tells it in the book. There's a man driving a taxi cab. He's driving a man to the airport. And he drives into the airport. The gentleman gets out, goes to his gate. And before the taxi cab driver drives off, he just looks in his rearview mirror and he sees the wallet of the man in the back seat. And automatically thinks, oh my goodness, this guy is not going to be able to board his plane. So he parks his car, parks the taxi cab, grabs the man's wallet, like darts all the way down to the end of the airport to give this guy his wallet. And he sees as he's looking for his wallet. And he's without a breath and he said, oh, here, you left this in my car. And the man looks at him as if he were a criminal, as if he had withheld his wallet or something. And he just kind of goes, ugh, grabs his wallet angrily and boards the plane. The taxi cab driver gets so angry, he walks off, like mumbling to himself, gets back into his taxi cab, picks up someone else, and is just talking to himself about how upset he is and he's never going to be nice to anybody else ever again because there's one person. And how many times he'd been so nice to people, and this guy just wasn't even, the taxi cab driver said, I wasn't looking for oh, thank you. But to be angry and look at me as a criminal, I'm never going to do that again. So Joanna says that there are many cases of this taxi cab driver in the world, that people who are ungrateful create people like that. Now, not putting 100% blame on the guy who was dropped off at the airport for creating this now angry person. But Joanna says there is a level of responsibility for creating people like that, for making people feel that way. It brings us back to the idea that we have responsibility in the ways in which we do things. Again, Spiritism doesn't tell us we need to do one thing or the other, but it just shows us the consequences of our actions and what happens thereafter. So we can effect positive change and spread love and tranquility, or not. It's up to us to affect change, to do better, ultimately for ourselves first, right? It should be a motivation and a meaning for our existence. Oftentimes, though, what winds up happening is that we have to go through great suffering or some form of suffering for us to kind of wake up a little bit and go, wow, I really had a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be happy for. So it's better, I tell you, we share with you, don't wait for those circumstances to happen in your life, to be grateful. I always like to share this story of this gentleman whose name I don't even know, and I didn't know at the time either. I got into a conversation probably about 14 and a half years ago when I was recommencing my life, and I was standing in line at the local community college to register for courses. And the line was so long that a bunch of us got tired, so we were seated. And I was talking to this older gentleman. I was like 19 at the time, so older. He probably was like 30. God. But we just started having a conversation, and he was saying to me, you know, I look at my life and I sort of like a images flash before me, thinking about everything that has happened to me in my life. He said, I've lost my wife, lost my house, lost my everything, and I barely see my son anymore. I only see him on weekends. And so, of course, my curiosity piqued, and I said, well, what happened? And he said to me, well, my wife wound up having an affair, and she moved away, and I only get to see my son on the weekends. And he said, now I look at my life, and I'm grateful for the smallest things, because I had everything. And in a moment, overnight, my life changed. He said, I didn't realize how rich and amazing my life was until, in a moment, overnight, I lost everything that I realized was so precious to me. And he said, if I could go back to having that nice life, I wouldn't even choose a nice life in the beautiful $300,000, $400,000 home. He said, I would be content if I could just have my old life back. I would live in a shack, poor, just to have back my family. And he said, but I know that that's not realistic, and I know that that'll never happen. But he said, you know what? Moving forward, this has changed my life. And I am determined to be grateful for everything, for any moment that I get, whatever it is. So that his story has always has stayed in my mind, because the look in his eyes was so real and so passionate that I knew that he meant what he said. And sometimes we have to go through those situations to come to a point of deep gratitude for everything in our lives. So we looked up some ways to achieve this gratitude. You know, Joanna says that we should just practice it, just go out and practice it. Like Dr. Smiley said, even if it's the small things at home, that's our primary place of learning, is in our family circle, our family unit, whatever the dynamic might be. Practicing being grateful, saying thank you to your mother or father, sister, brother, for them being there, or your cat or dog, or even your fish that might bring you happiness. It's something silly, but it is really something we can express gratitude to God, to the universe, for the blessing that I could walk, that my arms work, that I don't have a problem to breathe in and out. And you never think about how grateful we should be to be able to breathe until we come across someone that has trouble breathing. 15 steps to achieve gratitude. Appreciate. Stop labeling. Optimism. Release your past. Avoid comparison. Kindness. Stop using excuses. Nurture your relationships. Joanna shares in the book that people that have the tendency to be ungrateful are the very people that are in their own family circle, they treat poorly, but are good to people who are outside. She said that's a form of ungratefulness that is very dangerous, because the family is the cell of society. And if our family units is broken, then our society can also become broken. So it's good for this new year to practice nurturing our relationships, even if you live by yourself. Actually, both ways. If you live by yourself, you should nurture the relationship with yourself. But also, if you live in a family setting, don't forget about yourself. It's the best advice my mother ever gave me in life when I moved out of my parents' home 7 years ago to venture off. And she said, don't forget about yourself. And I thought that was the weirdest statement ever. And I said, what do you mean, in her broken English? She said something to that effect. I was like, what are you talking about? I thought she was mixing up her words again. But she said, don't forget about yourself, which was so odd to hear, because that was a woman who always forgot about herself, who gave everything to her family and didn't take care of herself the way she probably should have. But she said, learn from me. Don't forget about yourself. Love yourself. Take care of yourself. Find time for yourself. It's important. Nurture your relationships with yourself and with others. Forgiveness. We saw a movie recently whose name, it was with Michael Fassbender, The Ocean something. The Light Between Oceans. The Light Between Oceans. And one of the characters has this line, And the character was a German person married to an English person. And the wife, who was married to a German, said, you know, he had moved to Britain and he'd gotten so much mistreatment from people who hated Germans. People would throw rocks at him, spit on him, kick him in the street for no reason. And she said to her husband, "You're always happy. Like, you never like come home and go, oh my God, you know, this man, he punched me in my face today." She said, "You would come home with bruises and you would just be happy." And she said, in the character, he said, "It takes so much energy to maintain hate for others every day that I'd rather release it and choose to forgive and be free of it." So forgiveness is big. Avoid impressing others. Commit to your goals. Care for your body. Believe, dream, and give. We found this kind of interesting too. I don't know if you guys can actually see it. Can you see that? This is things to do when you're feeling down. You can read it for yourself. Dance in the living room. Iron some clothes. Plant something. Go to a park. Cook a nice meal. Dust the living room. Come dust my house, please. Buy flowers. Drive to the new town. Hula hoop. Jump rope. These actually have scientific reasons why this actually works. When you're feeling down, if you go for a run, you're increasing your catecholamines in your body, and you're just changing the chemistry in your body for something more positive. That's why they always recommend to working out, going for a jog, yoga, to change your landscape, your visual landscape. So there are a lot of people who feel like, well, I'm so depressed, what can I give to others? I'm so sad. You'd be amazed how good it feels to go and comfort someone else when you're suffering, but you don't know the suffering of someone else, and how good it is to share that. So with that, I thank you for listening, a little over an hour. I do ask you for the next few moments, we're going to put some soft music on, and I ask you to fill out the paper. It can just be one or two things. You can say the rest for later, or not. I'm going to ask Annie to put on some soft music. This goes for the teenagers in the back as well. Please fill out the paper. You guys have the paper? No? I'll give it to you. Can you get your something? Lulu, give your sister a pen right there. So I'm gonna put it on the. I'm gonna put what we're filling out on the slide here in a second. Give me just 1 second to do that. So what we're filling out are these things you can actually Google, the ways in which to be grateful. Online, you can find a ton of different excerpts. They're called gratitude sheets. You actually can find them again online. Yes, I will. It's highly recommend having a gratitude journal. You might think it's, oh, I don't have time for it. For those of you who are online or watching the recorded version, again, you can Google gratitude journal or gratitude sheets, and you can pull this up, print it. You can create your own little booklet. There's a slew of, if you go to Barnes & Nobles, there's so many gratitude journals. You can get a blank journal at the dollar store and just make it your gratitude journal. It doesn't have to be fancy schmancy like this is. What I really liked about this, I think I had it on this one. Somewhere, you should also write down the goals that you have for yourself. Goals you wish to achieve this year, this month, this week. These types of things are really good to do every day. But sometimes, we get lost in the day-to-day life. But these are really good to do when you're feeling a little bit down about anything, because it kind of shifts your mind a little bit. You might think, oh, wow, I really do have a lot to be grateful for. I do. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have more. Sarah, do you have more than one? Actually, I think does anyone have two papers on theirs? Can you give me that one, Jeanette? Does anyone have two papers? Can I have one, Rita? Just need one. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Jeanette. So please take the time to write, and fill out. And if anyone wants to volunteer sharing anything that they're grateful for or an experience they had recently that they're grateful for, but you don't have to. Sometimes these things are better kept, private if you will. That's okay too. A good mantra to have whenever we find ourselves in a difficult situation is, could be worse. It could be worse. For those of you who are watching on the web, one of the things that you even can jot down yourself, if you don't want to write anything down, your morning gratitude prayer before you begin your day, list 10 things you're grateful for, big or small. It could be, I'm grateful that I realized I had enough puppy chow to feed my dog, or I'm grateful that I washed my jeans last night, so I have to wash them this morning. And it's something small, but something still to be grateful for. I'll share that I'm grateful to be able to hold this mic in my hand. Literally, there are other people that don't have that capability to hold things or walk or breathe normally or see. I met a man, true story, who had progressive hearing loss, was in his eyesight. I don't remember the illness that he had. He was also losing his eyesight and began having trouble walking. And I said to him, we had this long conversation. I said, well, can I ask you a question? What is the hardest thing you experience? Assuming that things are hard for you. I don't know. I don't know you. And he said to me, honestly, I just take things in stride. I take it day by day. The days that I can see my wife, I'm happy. The days that I can't, I'm glad that the sensation in my hand still works. So when I caress her face or hold her hand or I pet my dog, I could still feel that. I could hear still a little bit. So it's something we don't think about, things we take for granted every day. Would anyone like to share what they're grateful for before we end our session here? Either one. Joseph the Brave.
My family.
That's nice. Anyone else? Oh, hold on a second.
Very grateful for my health.
Juliana?
Being able to walk outside and leave my house.
You want to share anything you're grateful for? No? Anyone else?
I'm great for the center.
I'm grateful for gratitude.
You're grateful for gratitude. That's nice. Vanessa?
I'm grateful for my cozy bed.
That's nice. I'm grateful for you all, for Spiritism as well. So these things are really good to do. If you can incorporate them, even if you're not big on journaling, if you want to just try to make it a habit to get up every day and think about things that you're grateful for. I'm grateful that I could stand up by myself in my bed, or I'm grateful that I could think clearly. Just something for us to think about and be grateful for. So let us do a meditation slash visualization. We're going to dim the light. And allow the music to play. You all can take these papers home. They are yours to keep, to replicate, or to find other ones online. It's also really good if you during your gospel at home, or if you hold family meetings, and family meetings are something really great to have in a family where you all, it's a topic for another day, we can explain what that is. But basically when you meet together as a family, it's really good to take the opportunity, maybe before dinner or in the breakfast time in the morning when all the family members are sitting together, to each one of us go around the room and say what we're grateful for. It's a good habit to create within our family setting. Even if we live by ourselves, we can do it, speak it out loud. But let's take this opportunity to close our eyes for a brief moment and think about all the things that we are grateful for. To visualize all the blessings we've experienced in this life, whether they are physical blessings or of a spiritual nature. Perhaps you're grateful for a promotion at work, or the kindness someone showed you. Let's take this opportunity to thank our Creator. Giving thanks for being able to be here together in unity for a similar cause of self-enlightenment, finding peace within us. In gratitude and profound gratitude, we take this opportunity to thank our spirit guides, our mentors, for continuously inspiring us, encouraging us, day in, day out, tirelessly. Let us take every moment, be grateful for our very existence, grateful to be able to be reincarnated on this earth, to grow, to learn, to exercise kindness. We thank you for these moments of enlightenment and of joy. Let us feel this blessing and this quiet moment. And we call our practitioners to come and serve at the front for a moment of passes, to allow the noble guides to bless us with their presence, their love. And if you are waiting to receive the passes, let us try to remain in quiet prayer or meditation, something positive, to help the ambiance, to help the good and noble spirits that are here to help all of us in both realms of life.